The phone rang at exactly 3 a.m. My brother's voice, broken and frantic, spilled through the line. "Claire, it's Dad. He's had a massive heart attack. He's asking for you. Please come home." Without thinking, I abandoned everything. My Milan studio, my spring showcase, my future. I packed a suitcase in 5 minutes flat, drained my savings, and boarded the next flight to Connecticut. Because when family needs you, you show up. But when I rushed into that hospital, there was no Dad in critical condition. No doctors, no ICU room. There was nothing. Nothing but a lie. They had faked a medical emergency. Not out of love, not out of fear, but out of greed. My $8.5 million inheritance would become available in 3 weeks, and they wanted it all. They thought they could break me with guilt, but the daughter they lured back was not the same girl who had left 5 years ago. This time, I wasn't coming home to save them. I was coming home to end the game. If you were in my place, would you forgive or would you fight back? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if you believe family should mean loyalty, not betrayal, subscribe for more real stories every day. My name is Claire Whitmore. I was born and raised in Fairfield, Connecticut, the youngest daughter of Richard and Marianne Whitmore. From the outside, we were the perfect family, a respected name, a beautiful home, a thriving real estate empire. But behind closed doors, the truth was different. My father loved success more than he loved anything else. My mother worshipped appearances, and my brother Daniel and sister Elise learned early that loyalty to the family business came before loyalty to each other. I was the outlier, the dreamer, the daughter who chose sketches and fabrics over sales projections and quarterly reports. When I announced at 23 that I was moving to Milan to pursue a career in fashion, they called it selfish. They said I was turning my back on the family legacy. They made it clear that if I failed, they would not be there to catch me. I left anyway, and for 5 years, I built a life of my own. I fought for every opportunity, every runway show, every stitch of recognition. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Still, no matter how far I went, there was always one tether I couldn't quite cut. My father. He was the only one who had ever defended me, the only one who in quiet moments told me he was proud. When Daniel's call came that night, begging me to come home, I didn't hesitate. I threw everything into a single suitcase, left a note for my business partner, and boarded a one-way flight. Heart pounding with fear and guilt. In my mind, I kept seeing Dad in a hospital bed, frail and calling for me, needing me. I would have given anything to be by his side. But the second I set foot in that hospital and found no trace of him, the illusion shattered. The pain of betrayal cut deeper than any rejection they had ever dealt me before. It wasn't love that had summoned me, it was desperation, it was greed. And it was a trap carefully set by the very people who should have protected me. As I stood there in that sterile hallway surrounded by strangers, one truth crystallized in my mind. This wasn't a family emergency, it was a family ambush, and they had no idea who they were dealing with anymore. Daniel was waiting outside baggage claim when I arrived. He looked exactly the same. Sandy hair perfectly combed, pressed khakis, the classic image of a Connecticut golden boy, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Claire," he said, pulling me into a stiff hug. "Thank God you're here." "How's Dad?" I asked immediately. Searching his face for clues, he hesitated. "Just a beat too long. It's touch and go," he said, grabbing my suitcase. "Mom's at home. Everyone's waiting for you," I frowned. Waiting, I thought he was in surgery. Shouldn't we be at the hospital? Daniel's grip tightened on the handle of my suitcase. "Of course. But Mom thought you might want to freshen up first. Everyone's gathering at the house." Something felt wrong, off kilter, but exhaustion and adrenaline blurred my instincts. The drive home was surreal. The town had changed. New developments bearing the Whitmore logo lined the streets where farmland used to stretch. Gleaming condos, shopping centers, office parks, all with our family name stamped proudly across them. "You've expanded," I said carefully. Daniel's jaw tightened. Yeah, Dad had big plans, took some risks. I watched him closely. Risks. That wasn't a word my father threw around lightly, especially not with money. As we pulled into the driveway, my heart twisted. The Whitmore estate stood as grand and imposing as ever, but something about it seemed hollow now. The gleaming facade couldn't mask the rot underneath. Several luxury cars were parked outside, One I recognized immediately as belonging to Bernard Barton, our family attorney. Another a sleek black Porsche that belonged to Uncle Paul, a relative who only showed up when money was involved. Alarm bells screamed louder in my mind. "Why is Bernard here?" I asked. And Uncle Paul, Daniel smiled tightly. "Everyone's just rallying around Mom. It's been a hard couple of days." He avoided my eyes as he said it. Another crack in the perfect story. Inside the house, the air was thick with forced sympathy. Elise rushed forward, all glossy hair and designer perfume, throwing her arms around me. "Claire," she cried, "we've been so worried." I stiffened under her embrace. Elise, who hadn't returned a single one of my calls in the last year. Elise, who once told me leaving Connecticut was the biggest mistake of my life. "Where's Dad?" I asked, scanning the room. Elise bit her lip. "Resting," she said. "The doctors said I cut her off. I want to see him." An awkward silence fell over the room. Mom approached, then immaculate in a navy cashmere sweater and pearls, her face composed but her hands fidgeting at her sides. "Sweetheart," she said, "you've had a long trip. Let's sit down, have some lunch. We'll explain everything, Artie." "No," I said firmly. "I want to see Dad." Now, Mom exchanged a look with Daniel, a look I knew too well, a silent conversation filled with decisions I wasn't a part of. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Of course. We'll go to the hospital right after you eat." But their hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. Something was terribly wrong. Still, I sat down, played their game. Let them pour coffee into the fine china. Listened as they made small talk about the town, the weather, the new developments. Not a single word about Dad's condition. No updates from doctors. No paperwork from the hospital. Nothing real, only smiles. Stretched too tight and reassurances that sounded rehearsed. My stomach churned. Not from jet lag, not from anxiety, from betrayal. After lunch, I insisted again. "I want to see him." Daniel and Mom exchanged another glance. Finally, Daniel grabbed the car keys. "Fine, let's go." The hospital was only 15 minutes away, but the drive felt endless. The closer we got, the more certain I became. There would be no hospital room, no chart at the nurse's station, no Dad. And when we arrived, my worst fears were confirmed. The nurse at the front desk frowned when Daniel gave her Dad's name. "I'm sorry," she said. Tapping at her computer, "There's no Richard Whitmore admitted here, and room 417 has been vacant for days." I turned to Daniel. His face had gone pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Where is he, Daniel?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous. "Where is our father?" He grabbed my arm. "Not here," he muttered. "Just come back to the house, we'll explain everything." I yanked my arm away. "No!" "Tell me now." Daniel's shoulders slumped. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Dad's fine. He's at home. He had a minor health scare. We exaggerated. We had to get you back, Claire. It's important." The ground shifted under my feet. Everything inside me went cold. They had lied. They had staged a crisis. They had played on my love and fear and loyalty to drag me back. For what? For money, for leverage. The betrayal burned hotter than anything I had ever felt. As I stared at my brother, I realized something chilling. This wasn't about family. It wasn't about love. It was about survival, their survival at my expense. And they would do whatever it took to secure it, but so would I. Back at the house, I walked ahead of Daniel. I no longer cared about appearances. I didn't care about polite family lies or whispered reassurances. I cared about the truth, and I was going to get it. The heavy oak door swung open under my hand. Inside the house was buzzing with quiet conversation. Laptops, open papers, strewn across the dining table. Not grief, not crisis. Business. At the head of the table stood my father. Healthy, robust. Not a man who had brushed death's door, but a man swirling bourbon in a heavy glass, surveying the scene like a general commanding his troops. The room fell silent when they saw me. Dad set down his drink arms, outstretched. "Claire, sweetheart, you're home." I stepped back, the betrayal written all over my face. "Don't you dare," I said quietly. "Don't you dare pretend this is normal." Mom rose from her chair, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her skirt. "Claire, please, sit down. We can explain everything." "I don't want lunch," I snapped. "I don't want coffee. I want the truth. Now." The room shifted, the facade cracking just enough to let the ugliness seep through Dad's side, motioning toward the dining chairs. "Sit down. It's time you understood what's really happening." I didn't move. I wanted to hear it, standing ready to walk away if necessary. Dad exchanged a glance with Mom before speaking. "The family business is at a crossroads," he began. "We expanded aggressively, took on some debt. A few projects haven't materialized as quickly as we'd hoped." He made it sound so clean, so clinical, but I heard the panic underneath, the desperation. "And my inheritance?" I asked, voice cutting through the room like a blade. "How does that fit into this sudden crossroads?" Dad hesitated. Bernard, the family lawyer, cleared his throat. "Claire, your grandfather's trust matures in 3 weeks, approximately $8.5 million in assets." "I know," I said coldly. Bernard continued, his voice oily and smooth. "The trust could be transferred directly into Whitmore Developments as a limited partnership investment. It would stabilize the company during this transitional period." "In other words," I said, "you want my money to bail you out." Dad stiffened. "This isn't about bailing anyone out. It's about protecting the family legacy, about preserving everything your grandfather built, for all of us." I let the silence stretch, let them twist in it. Then I spoke, every word, deliberate. "You lied. You faked a heart attack. You manipulated me into coming back here under false pretenses. You played on my fear, my love, my guilt. And now you stand here asking me to hand over everything I've fought to protect, because you made bad business decisions." Mom flinched. Elise shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Daniel stared at the floor. Only Dad held my gaze, his expression hardening. "You owe this family," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Everything you are came from us." "No," I said quietly, "everything I am, I built despite you. Despite the constant disapproval, despite the years of being told I wasn't enough because I chose a different path." I turned to Bernard. "I'm not signing anything today." Dad's face darkened. "This isn't a request, Claire." And there it was, the truth laid bare. It was never about family, it was about control, it was about money, and they would do anything to get it, even if it meant destroying the one daughter who had managed to escape. In that moment, standing in the ruins of what I once called home, I made my decision. I wasn't here to save them. I wasn't here to patch up their mistakes. I was here to protect myself, to protect what little my grandfather had tried so hard to preserve. They had called me back thinking I was still the obedient daughter who would fall into line. They were wrong. I wasn't here to surrender. I was here to fight. And by the time I was finished, they would wish they had never made that call. That night, as the rest of the house buzzed with whispered meetings and frantic phone calls, I lay awake in my old bedroom. The ceiling above me was still dotted with faded glow in the dark stars from my childhood. The room looked the same, but I wasn't the same girl who once dreamed under those stars. I was someone else now, someone they didn't know how to handle. I spent the early hours crafting a plan, not out of revenge, out of necessity, out of survival. First, I needed information, proof, evidence of what they had done, because gut instincts weren't enough. If I was going to bring this house of cards down, I needed to do it properly. Legally, irrefutably, at breakfast, I played my part, polite, apologetic. "I overreacted," I said, lowering my eyes. The jet lag, the shock, I wasn't thinking clearly. Relief flooded their faces. Dad patted my hand. "Of course, sweetheart. We understand family first, right?" Family first. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. I spent the day letting them parade me around their failed empire. Daniel drove me from one half-built condominium to another. Empty shells of buildings, silent job sites, vacant shopping centers, each one a monument to poor decisions and reckless ambition. He talked non-stop about future plans, potential investors, how my investment would change everything, save everything. I listened carefully, asking innocent questions, recording every word on my phone tucked into my jacket pocket. By late afternoon, I had what I needed. Details of financial mismanagement, evidence of investor fraud, admissions of desperate backroom deals. But I wasn't done yet. I called Margaret, the one person who had warned me before it was too late. She arranged a meeting with her nephew, a private investigator specializing in financial crimes. That night, under the cover of darkness, I slipped out the back door and met him at a diner. 2 towns over. I handed over everything, recordings, Photographs, notes. He promised to pull background checks, trace hidden assets, verify offshore accounts if they existed. Meanwhile, I reached out to Ethan Carter, the boy who once slipped love notes into my locker, now a financial crimes investigator with the state. We met quietly, talked cautiously. I outlined the situation in hypothetical terms. No names, no accusations, just facts. He listened intently, his face growing darker with every detail. If what you're saying is true, he said slowly, this isn't just bad business. This is federal wire fraud, investor deception, maybe even money laundering. And if I can prove it, I asked, you could stop them before they hurt anyone else. But Claire, be careful. People who are desperate do desperate things. I nodded. I wasn't naive anymore. Over the next 3 days, I played the dutiful daughter, nodded through family dinners, smiled during strategy sessions, pretended to review the documents. Bernard pushed across the table, all while building my case, piece by piece, quietly, ruthlessly. Margaret's nephew uncovered offshore accounts tied to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He traced luxury assets purchased with misappropriated funds. Yachts, vacation homes, private jets, all bought while contractors went unpaid and retirement accounts were drained. Ethan connected me with regulators. Quiet conversations behind closed doors, preparing the ground for what was coming. The deadline, Dad set, loomed closer. 3 days, 2 days. One day, they thought they had won. That I had been guilted, worn down, pulled back into their orbit. They were wrong. The night before the big signing, the family gathered in the living room. Champagne chilling on ice, documents ready for signatures. Dad raised his glass. To the future, he said, smiling proudly, to family. I clinked my glass against his forced. A smile, but inside I was counting the hours, the minutes, the seconds. Because tomorrow morning when Bernard returned with the final paperwork, he wouldn't be the only one walking through that door. Tomorrow they would learn the truth. The daughter they had lured back to save them was never theirs to control again. The daughter they tried to trap had become something they couldn't manipulate. Tomorrow they would lose everything, and this time they would have no one to blame but themselves. Morning came heavy and gray. A storm was brewing outside the wind, rattling the old windows of the Whitmore estate. Inside, a different kind of storm was waiting to break. I dressed carefully, charcoal skirt, cream blouse, neutral makeup, calm, unshakable. At 9 a.m., sharp Bernard Barton arrived, briefcase in hand, confidence oozing from every pore. He sat up at the dining table, spreading out documents like a man preparing a feast. Dad poured coffee, Mom fussed with flower arrangements. Daniel and Elise hovered nearby, fake smiles pasted on everyone, pretending this was just another day. Another deal. They didn't see it coming. I sat at the table, hands folded neatly in my lap. Before I sign anything, I said smoothly, I'd like Bernard to walk me through the documents. For the record, I placed my phone on the table. Recorder app running. Bernard chuckled. Of course, Claire. Everything is straightforward. He launched into his well-rehearsed speech. Words like family partnership, strategic investment, preserving the legacy filled the room. I nodded along, taking mental notes, letting the web spin itself tighter, and then at precisely 9:17 a.m., the doorbell rang. Mom frowned. We're not expecting anyone. I'll get it, I said already. Rising, my hands were steady, my heart beat calm. I opened the front door wide. Standing there were 6 individuals, 2 men in dark suits, flashing federal badges, an agent from the Securities and Exchange Commission, 2 uniformed police officers, and behind them Ethan Carter, his face grim but determined. Claire Whitmore. The lead agent asked. I nodded. They're all inside. Everything's ready. The agent swept past me into the house. The moment they entered the dining room, time seemed to freeze. Dad straightened his eyes, narrowing. Who are you? He demanded. Special Agent Ross, the man said, flashing his badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant to search the premises and seize all financial records related to Whitmore developments. Mom gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. Daniel took a step back. Bernard dropped his pen. Elise just stared at me, mouth open, silent. Claire. Dad said, his voice a dangerous growl. What have you done? I met his gaze without blinking. I protected what grandfather left me. What he meant for good, what you tried to twist into your lifeline. As agents fanned out across the house, gathering laptops, files, hard drives, Dad lunged toward me. You think you're some kind of hero, he hissed. You've destroyed this family. No, I said softly. You destroyed it the moment you chose greed over love. An SEC agent approached Bernard, seizing the stack of documents. These are evidence now, sir. Step away from the table. Daniel looked like he might bolt for the door. 2 officers moved in, blocking him. Mom sat heavily into a chair, trembling, eyes glazed. Richard Whitmore. The agent said firmly, "You are under arrest for wire fraud securities, fraud conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering." The words hit like gunshots. Final irrevocable. Dad's face twisted in rage as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "You're no daughter of mine," he spat. "I stopped being your daughter," I said quietly, "when you decided I was just a bank account waiting to be emptied." Daniel was cuffed next, then Bernard protesting loudly. Mom was read her rights, but not immediately arrested. Her role would be evaluated separately. Elise remained frozen, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. As they were led out one by one, neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, watching the spectacle, the mighty Whitmores exposed, ruined by their own greed. Inside, I stood alone in the wreckage. The house that had once been filled with laughter and promise, now echoed with betrayal and loss. Margaret arrived minutes later, her expression grim but proud. "You did the right thing, Claire," she said, squeezing my hand. "I know," I whispered, "but it doesn't make it hurt any less. Because betrayal by strangers is painful, but betrayal by the people who raised you, that cuts deeper than anything else." I watched from the porch as the squad cars disappeared down the street. A chapter of my life closing behind flashing red and blue lights. I wasn't the same Claire who had boarded a plane from Milan in a panic. I wasn't the same daughter who once begged for scraps of approval. I was something else now, something stronger, something they couldn't control anymore, and this time I wasn't looking back. The days that followed blurred together, court hearings, depositions, endless meetings with lawyers and investigators. Whitmore developments collapsed within weeks. Investors pulled out, projects halted. Assets were frozen. The empire my family had built, the one they worshipped more than each other, crumbled to dust. Dad was denied bail. Daniel faced a mountain of charges. Bernard lost his license to practice law and faced his own criminal trial. Mom, she negotiated a plea deal in exchange for her cooperation. House arrest, heavy fines, social exile, worse than prison in her world. Elise. She avoided charges for now. Her role was murkier, less direct, but her silence had made her complicit. We barely spoke. When we did, it was strained. Tentative, 2 strangers fumbling through the ruins of a broken family. As for me, my grandfather's trust matured on my 30th birthday, just as he intended. $8.5 million and a choice I could have run. Taken the money and disappeared into a new life somewhere far away. Milan, Paris, anywhere but here. But when I looked around at the wreckage, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about me. It was about every contractor who never got paid, every employee laid off without severance, every investor who trusted the Whitmore name and lost everything. I couldn't erase the past, but I could shape what came next. I met with James Sullivan, my grandfather's old lawyer. Together we created the Whitmore Restitution Fund. I directed more than half of my inheritance to repay victims. The rest I used to start over, not in fashion, not yet. Not until I felt whole again. Instead, I stayed in the town that had seen my family fall from grace, and I rebuilt something better. We converted abandoned developments into affordable housing, created jobs, restored trust. Slowly the whispers faded, slowly the town forgave. Maybe not entirely, but enough. I rented a small loft above an old bookstore. Nothing fancy, nothing like the Whitmore estate. And for the first time in my life, it was mine. One evening, as I was locking up the office, Margaret found me on the steps watching the sunset. "You know," she said, handing me a cup of coffee, "your grandfather would be proud. Not because you saved the money, but because you remembered what it was meant for. To build, to protect, to create something good." I smiled, blinking against the setting sun. "I just wish it hadn't cost so much." She patted my hand. "Everything worth building costs something, Claire. Sometimes it costs everything." As the weeks turned into months, I started sketching again. Not for deadlines, not for runway shows, just for me. The love I had buried under years of survival came back to life. Line by line, color by color. A slow resurrection of the dreams they once tried to crush. And in the quiet, in the spaces between grief and rebuilding, I found something I thought I had lost forever. Peace, not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of surviving, of standing my ground when it would have been easier to run, of choosing integrity over comfort, of rewriting my own story. My family had tried to teach me that love was conditional, transactional, earned only through obedience and sacrifice. But standing there watching the last light fade from the sky, I knew the truth. My grandfather had always hoped I'd find love isn't something you buy. It isn't something you steal. It's something you build. Brick by brick, choice by choice. Action by action, I had lost the family I was born into, but I had gained something far more powerful. A family of my choosing, a life of my making, and a future no one could take away from me. The real legacy wasn't money. It wasn't property. It wasn't the name etched onto the gates of a crumbling estate. It was the courage to walk away, the strength to stand alone, and the belief that I deserved better than loyalty bought with lies. In the end, I didn't just inherit a fortune. I inherited a mission, a purpose, a promise to myself, that no one would ever make me doubt my worth again. Sometimes the deepest cuts don't come from enemies. They come from the hands we once trusted most, the ones we believed would catch us when we fell, the ones who taught us to fly, only to clip our wings when it suited them. But betrayal, painful as it is, can also be a beginning, a doorway to a new life, a fire that burns away the lies and leaves only truth behind. I lost the family I thought I needed, but I found the strength I never knew I had. I discovered that love, real love, doesn't demand you sacrifice your soul. It invites you to become more of yourself, not less. And sometimes the family we choose is far stronger than the one we were born into. What about you? If the people you loved most tried to steal everything you built, would you forgive them, or would you stand your ground and fight for the life you deserve? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if you believe that loyalty must be earned, not demanded, make sure you like this video, subscribe to EN True Tales, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. New powerful stories every single day. Stay strong, stay true. Your story matters.